Sarah Boone tried to use her victim, Jorge Torres, to try to get more visitation and control over her son and to get money. This is absolutely disgusting. I have to talk about it. The Sarah Boone family law case. I have not been covering it much, but it's coming to a close. Now, sadly, I couldn't go in person due to some personal reasons. I was considering it for a while. Now, most of the information we're going to talk about, I gathered from Hear Me Out on YouTube, Human Tooth X on Reddit, and Tanika's 2 Cents on YouTube. Make sure to check them out. I will have links to them in the pinned comment. I also want to mention, Hear Me Out says he has the full transcript and plans to do a recreation video. So I would make sure you subscribe for that. So let's start with the court minutes before we talk about what happened in court, just to give you an idea. Okay, so we have the petitioner witnesses sworn and testified, being Brian and Sarah. Petitioner exhibits admitted into evidence as following. So this would be from Brian. We have one parenting plan for trial, and it's with filed dates. We have 2 billing records, 3 respondents FA filed, and then we have a 4 child support guidelines worksheet. And then if we go over here, we have Sarah. And when you look at that, Sarah has quite a bit here. And we have the GTL communication. We have the parenting plan 2018 signed by both parties. That's very important. Remember that. This original parenting plan is signed by both parties, and that Sarah seems to try to use that. 3, parenting and divorce certificate Brian Boone, parenting and divorce certificate Sarah Boone. We have 5, notice of filing. 6, trust statement. 7, current interest rates. 8, DOC canteen items with current pricing. Sarah has a different wording for what this is, by the way, so you're going to want to stay tuned for that. And we have 9, JPay communication. The opening statement was from 140 to 204. Court's ruling. The court hereby denied respondent's motion for contempt and to compel petitioner to submit visitation applications immediately, which was filed August 20th, 2025. So Sarah tried to hold Brian in contempt and force him to submit visitation applications. That was denied. Respondent's motion to appear in person, filed August 20th, 2025, is hereby moot, as stated by the court. The court hereby grants petitioner's petition for relocation, filed February 14th, 2023. So Brian's relocation got approved. Court took judicial notice of respondent's motion for contempt alimony payments, filed August 11th, 2023. Letter to Judge Dean, filed October 18th, 2022. Motion for hearing, filed February 22nd, 2023. Both parties must file closing arguments not later than Tuesday, September 2nd, 2025 by 5 p.m. Closing arguments must be no more than 5 pages. Yes, we're going to get a Sarah Boone letter for the closing arguments, and it can't be more than 5 pages. Judge didn't say only one-sided, so I expect Sarah's going to actually submit 10 pages. Just my guess. And yeah, so court's recessed. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this case. Let's talk about what's going on and what happened in court. Again, I couldn't make it in person. This is cobbled together. From what I gathered, I do want to mention, and this will be brought up later, the judge actually requested Sarah to be there in person, and it didn't happen. Sarah kept trying to ham it up on the video call, claiming it was hard to hear at times, but that seemed to not make any sense. Like, she would say it when no one was talking. I think she thought that it might bully them into a delay in forcing her travel, but instead, the judge got her to withdraw the request to be there in person as moot. Through the entire court appearance, Sarah had to keep being reminded what they were even deciding on. Sarah didn't seem to know what the case was about. And you might be thinking, that sounds ridiculous. That sounds like an exaggeration. And you're going to very quickly find out that no, it isn't. And Sarah also just would go on tangents that didn't matter to anything. The petition to relocate, that was temporary, that Sarah agreed to make permanent, but then tried to backtrack because she wanted to complain about it. So she's admitting that she's okay with the relocation of Brian, but now she's complaining about it. Brian's side wants the parenting plan to be 1 monthly visit and 1 call a week. I think that's too generous. I'm going to be honest. I think that's too generous for Sarah. Brian is being, in my opinion, too generous through this whole thing. I'm honestly hoping the judge cuts Sarah back even more, because if this isn't enough to show she's a bad influence from what they've submitted, oh boy, she is going to make it worse during this appearance. Brian mostly says he just wants to be able to make decisions about the son without Sarah. Sarah is all about the money. So she must have hated the fact that Brian's side is actually taking the stance that Sarah Boone owes Brian money. Yes, they went that direction. I'm so glad they did. Brian was giving her money that he didn't need to while she was incarcerated as commissary, but Brian's side will waive all of it and just do no money owed her in the future. So basically, Brian's side is like, look, Sarah Boone actually owes him money. Here's some reasons. We're willing to call it a wash. You might remember Sarah complained about all her family heirlooms and all the things, and she wanted money from Brian because he got rid of all of her family heirlooms. What we learned is Brian got a U-Haul himself, packed up her apartment himself, moved it all into a storage room himself, and paid $240 a month to store it throughout her entire trial. That's a lot of money. Then, when it was ruled that Sarah was never getting out, Brian packed up all of the valuable items and heirlooms and still has them stored at her house, and her family can come pick it up free of charge. Now, was there anything left in the storage unit? The answer to that is, according to Brian, yes. Getting this to actually focus is a little annoying, by the way. But yes, there's some money, some items left in the storage unit, about $200 worth. But it was intermixed in basically junk, garbage. It was garbage, and it was left. So we're going to go here, and there we go. Okay. The webcam's been a little iffy, I'm going to say. I might have to get a new one. This was a clearance webcam, but it was normally expensive. So it is what it is. No big loss. But yeah, so after all that complaining, Sarah never talked about her car. Because I'm assuming the fate of the car is actually bad for her, and someone convinced her to stop talking about it. But yeah, we get the full story, the full information of the storage unit and her heirlooms. It's all there. No one cares enough about Sarah to get them, or cares enough about the heirlooms to get them. Brian said Sarah has no friends because she burned all the bridges in her life while outside the courtroom, according to Hear Me Out. So there are some things, I didn't include a lot of it. That's why you definitely need to listen to the people that were there. Brian said a lot in the hallways and said a lot while off the record in the courtroom. A lot that is interesting, and I'm not including most of it. So definitely remember, there's a lot here. You're going to want to hear it because everyone heard something a little different, right? The alimony argument that's being talked about is before April 2022, because that's when he filed to stop it. The child support argument actually will go back to 2020 because that's when Sarah stopped doing the timeshare of the son. So, technically, in a worst case scenario, Brian could be found to owe money from her incarceration to April 2022 because he hadn't filed with the court yet. But remember, you're going to find out he was still paying Sarah and spending money for Sarah. And this has actually cost Brian money. His current attorney cost $14,000. He doesn't even know how much his previous attorney cost, but the previous attorney couldn't continue because everything got delayed because of Sarah. Sarah's trial kept getting delayed. In the argument for the attorney's fees, they bring up that Sarah concedes nothing. Sarah's first concession in the entire case has been that morning where she agreed finally to relocation after all this time. The fees, they want Sarah to pay the $14,000 in attorney's fees, are affixed to the chaos of Sarah's ongoing defiance. The argument basically is that they aren't arguing alimony isn't owed, from what I can gather, but Sarah has cost more than she missed out on, and they were kind of paying her still. There's actually $4,000 at the clerk of courts that was never released to Sarah. Brian wants it back. Sarah wants to control that $4,000. Sarah wouldn't have had access to the alimony anyway once sent because she was arrested and couldn't use the bank account. Brian is claiming that him and Sarah actually had their own agreement that instead of the normal alimony, because she couldn't access it, it would be for commissary and Zell and other things. I think Hear Me Out said that he heard that Brian was paying $600 a month, but I don't think that would include the storage unit and all of that. So remember, Brian was paying way more than at least I personally thought. Sarah began by complaining she represents herself with limited resources. We've heard this before when she was pro se. Sarah doesn't want to owe attorney's fees and blames Brian's lawyers for lack of communication. Sarah didn't want the blame for the relocation order being temporary, even though she demanded it. So, the relocation until today was temporary because Sarah wouldn't sign it. Now Sarah's agreeing to it, but all the extra fees, because Sarah wouldn't agree to it, she doesn't want to be liable for. Sarah started complaining about Brian and his lawyer being liars, and the judge had to stop her to tell her this is an opening statement. Sarah let that go in one ear and out the other. Sarah now wants to know if they will handle the motion for contempt, because remember, for Sarah Boone, this is all payback, and the judge explains no. Sarah is told to continue opening statement. Sarah is asking if the court received her exhibits, and the judge has to explain again, this is an opening statement. They're not talking about the evidence right now. Sarah says, well, what? I'm not sure when I'm supposed to be talking about my evidence or case. Am I talking about case law? I'm not sure what I'm doing. I told you, she doesn't know what's going on. Sarah just starts reading from her 33-page pre-trial statement. I don't think I ever covered it on the channel, but other people that covered case law, the family case more than me, the YouTubers I mentioned previously, the ones in the pinned comments, I believe they've all gone through it, so make sure you check it out. Maybe I will at some point, but geez. Sarah wants things like daily calls and personal space for the son, whatever that means. 2 people maximum on the visits. I'm not sure if she's saying she doesn't want Brian involved or just Brian and the son. The judge has to stop her and ask her opinion on Brian's side wanting 1 visit a month. Sarah agrees to 1 or 2, but basically it has to be dragged out of her because she can't really get more than that due to being in prison. I expect she'll lose visitation privileges at some point, and that won't be an issue anyway. Sarah wants split holidays and equal time for holidays. How? I don't know. Sarah wants to be involved in all decisions and court-forced positive communication. Everything she wants, basically Sarah wants a court order that everyone must be positive and go her way. The judge has to redirect her to talk about the alimony. You see, Sarah believes she should still get $1,000 a month in alimony, which remember, if Brian's putting $600 into things for Sarah to spend, $240 for his storage unit, whatever other expenses Sarah cost him, plus $14,000 in lawyer's fees, there is an argument that even if the judge sides with Sarah on the alimony, Brian's paid it, right? Sarah now says she doesn't think she should get the child support. But she doesn't want to give up that $4,000 and wants to decide how it is spent. And then something about the son needing his own space again. I have no idea why she keeps harping on this. I don't know. The judge tells Sarah they have all of her mailed-in documents. Brian's side calls Brian Boone. Sarah responds, asking what is the document, and the judge has to explain this isn't a document. Brian Boone is a witness. At this moment, I felt like crying. Why could I wish I was there. I wish I was there. Sarah somehow did not know, according to her, that the parenting plan would even be discussed today. My opinion, personal opinion, I think Sarah was so focused on the money, the child was an afterthought, right? Sarah hasn't been involved in any major decisions since 2020. Brian doesn't even know how to contact her in jail. He has to wait for her to contact him. There are weeks with tons of calls, or like last week with 0 calls. The son's experience is talking to Sarah. It's either bad or good. She's upset and doesn't contact, takes it out on him, or she tries to make him feel good. Brian says he can't hear what they're talking about because Sarah forces seclusion when the son is on the phone. Brian explains Sarah will tell the son dad needs to buy him things. And Brian will say, no, it isn't your birthday. And then Sarah will say she's being defied by Brian. So Sarah, in prison, is telling the son, hey, your son will be like, man, I'd really like to have this. And Sarah's like, your dad will buy it for you. Tell him. Oh, and he doesn't buy it. Well, now he's defying me. She still wants to spend Brian's money. Brian has concerns about Sarah's decisions. Sarah doesn't make good decisions, even without alcohol. Sarah wasn't even doing 50-50 before the arrest. Sarah would just randomly leave the son with Brian or show up and say, I want him now on Brian's days. Brian would be called to pick up the son because Sarah was drunk. Sarah can't contribute money. He doesn't want to be legally binding that Sarah's demands that he spend money he can't afford have to be spent. The example they use is like if Sarah says, I want him to go to a camp for the summer and I can't afford it, I don't want to be legally forced to do it. He can't even connect with her for major decisions. Remember, she's in a prison. She just can't talk whenever she wants. Brian says that it should be 1 weekly phone call. And Brian has spent $50 to $60 in the last month alone on phone calls. He doesn't keep the son from answering the phone calls, but sometimes the son leaves his phone on silent or lets the battery die. So the son has his own phone, and he just doesn't want to talk to Sarah. No in-person visits have happened, and it's a 3-hour round trip to the prison. Brian would be willing to do 12 visits a year if he couldn't go each and every month because, trying to schedule things once a month can be hard with activities and things. Brian did stop paying alimony because Sarah couldn't access the bank account. He was sending her money other ways like Zelle. He kept notes of purchases because this is how they would do the alimony. He stopped giving her that money when her first court-appointed lawyer gave up on her. So Sarah not only lost the lawyer, when Sarah caused that issue, Brian says, oh, that's what she's going to do. No. She's delaying the criminal trial. I'm not going to keep paying her. The criminal trial needed to finish to get the agreement altered, and Sarah's delaying things. But he still paid for things like the storage unit. Brian was buying Sarah hot meals, gifts, phone calls, gifts for Lucas that would be wrapped and then given to him from Sarah. Again, this all stopped after the court-appointed attorney left. So that's why Sarah, if you watch Tanika's 2 cents, she covered Sarah complaining she wasn't getting enough because Brian cut her off. Sarah only talked about settling in her favor. So any settlement talk was always give Sarah everything she wants. She fought relocation. She fought for child support. Brian wasn't even employed for 2 years. Brian pays for all the phone calls. There's no support coming from Sarah's family. Brian said he would support a relationship between his son and his mother as long as the son wants it. But of course, the son is a minor, so he'd do what he can. Because, the son, it seems like maybe doesn't really want to talk to her all the time. And this is where things get off the rails. Sarah gets to cross Brian. Sarah asks Brian, have you ever included me in a decision? Can't think of any big ones that have happened. Sarah says, what about COVID? Brian says, you were against him getting vaccinated, which terrified me and I vaccinated him. And then Sarah yells, relocation! We discussed, you informed me of your position, and I disagreed. So basically, Sarah's like, you didn't consult me with relocation. And Brian says, we did discuss it. You told me your position, and I didn't agree. Sarah doesn't think that's a discussion, though, because discussions always end with Sarah getting what she wants. Sarah asks, when did you answer my calls? Not often. Why not? Because I don't care to talk to you. Why don't you pick up when I call? Because you don't call about big decisions, you call to yell about random things. You do realize you are under oath, right, Brian? Why haven't you answered my tablet messages? I don't want to. But Brian read all the messages. There was just nothing worth responding to. Sarah asked when he has last responded to his letters. He said, "You haven't sent me a handwritten letter in like 4 years." Sarah asked about last month. It was applications for visitation. So Sarah's like, "You didn't respond because you didn't submit that." So conniving. Talk of Sarah trying to talk to Brian through the child, which is a violation. Sarah's admitting to a violation, but it's okay because Brian won't talk to her. He doesn't have to talk to you, Sarah. Brian has to keep saying if Sarah wrote legitimate things, he would respond. Sarah asks how Brian knows that Sarah is upsetting the son on calls. The son tells him. Sarah tried to say, "I'm telling you," and the judge cuts her off and says, "You're not telling anybody anything." The judge gets tired of Sarah at some points. Sarah asks, does he know the son is upset about the visitation paperwork not being filed? Objection sustained. Sarah starts to ask about the son's girlfriend, and Jess says we're going to stay on, and the judge says we're going to stay on topic. The judge explains this isn't asking Sarah on her position on the issue because Sarah tried to interject about it being on topic. Sarah asks if she has ever purchased any items for her son. Objection. Scope. Sarah says, have I purchased anything for the son the last month? And it gets into the fact that third parties are buying gifts for the son on Sarah's behalf with their own money. So Sarah is having third parties send things to the son, which means she's giving people the son's address, which I would consider, if I was a judge, a negative to Sarah, and sending him things and putting it from Sarah. But remember, third parties were also brought up in her letter and about her appeal attorney not talking to her. She has some group on the outside that is just doing things. Sarah asked about her family, who could help buy things for the son. Brian says, well, your parents are dead. Philip could do it, and your other brother really can't do anything. All other relatives have cut you off or abandoned you. Sarah asked about her grandfather and grandmother, and Brian says something along the lines of, well, you're almost 50, and people of your age, usually the grandparents are dead. Fair enough. Sarah wanted to submit her 36th item to the court. So if we take a look here, you'll see the numbers here, right here. Because that might, the numbers might coincide with some of the things she mentions, but she had a lot of things that didn't make it in. And you'll find out later why some didn't make it in. But 36. Brian's side hasn't seen it, but it's submitted. It was the cost of prison calls. Sarah wasn't even going to ask about it. She was just going to submit it and not talk about it until the judge asked if she was going to ask about it. Sarah asked if he knew the cost when he signed up for them, and yeah. And the judge's like, because he paid them, and the judge's like, what's the point? Sarah, this is really, it's so broken-minded that it's hard to explain. What I can gather, what everyone seems to be able to gather, Sarah Boone believes that because Brian signed up to call her using a service that is the only way to call her, and it costs so much per minute, Brian has forfeited the right to complain it's costing him too much money. Does that make sense? No. But that's what they're doing. Sarah says Brian said before her criminal trial she was only exercising 30% of her time with the son. Could he explain why? I want you to brace yourself. Sarah tried to make the argument that Jorge Torres was dangerous and because he lived with her, it was limiting Sarah's time with the son. And that Sarah was actually being smart when she limited time with her son because it was for his safety. Brian said something about George is a man that you chose to bring into the home. Sarah says, I was explaining the safety, risk, and danger. Brian said, well, I could come pick him up. I would see you two drinking and having a good time. Sarah replies, Brian. Did Lucas ever say that he preferred to be at your house more because of the stuff you have versus the stuff I have at my place? Brian basically replies, we have the same stuff. My place is a little bigger, but it's still objection hearsay sustained. Sarah tries the same question, still objected to. So here we have, did you understand my criminal case and understand the domestic violence part of it? And Brian said, I remember hearing what you described it as, and I thought a very different viewpoint of it. Something along that lines. Basically, Brian is like saying, you were the abuser. Sarah asked if Brian loved her son. And then, did you see the videos that were shown? You might be wondering, what videos? She's trying to reference the videos in her murder trial. Those damning videos that shows Sarah was going to try to was like recording George to try to like fabricate domestic violence against herself to justify her hitting him and all that. Sarah still stands by all of that the videos in court that were shown in her trial somehow vindicate her, and that George is the problem. To this day, if you were wondering, she does not have remorse. George is still the enemy. George is at fault. To this day. Sarah asked, do you agree a child shouldn't hear the parents being called names? Did you call me a murderer? No. Killer? No. And Sarah says, can I remind you, Brian, you were under oath. He said, I never called you a murderer. I said you were being tried for murder. Which is true. Sarah tried to ask again, but asked and answered. Sarah asked if Brian ever tried to find contact information for her, and he said, what's she talking about? Sarah says, in case of an emergency contact. And the judge asks relevance, but Brian says he'd probably just call the prison. Sarah asks, what is she supposed to do to contact Brian she hasn't already tried? And the judge explains, that's not why we're here. We're here for the parenting plan, the attorney's fees, and the alimony. Remember, all of this is all about parenting plan, attorney's fees, alimony. And then Sarah says she didn't know the parenting plan was at issue. And the judge says she doesn't know why Sarah wouldn't know. Sarah asks how she can do her part of the parenting plan with holidays and weekends in prison. Brian said, I think that's the whole point. And this is where I need to stop and make an explanation so you understand what we're going into. Sarah Boone, throughout this entire case, is arguing about a parenting plan that she cannot do. But Sarah seems to think it's the newest parenting plan submitted when it's not. So Sarah is arguing against a parenting plan, saying she can't do it, therefore it shouldn't be changed. When the argument is from Brian's side, she can't do that parenting plan, so he needs a change to the one she can do. Sarah doesn't know what's happening in the courtroom. And no one's going to help her. The judge has to explain that this is the final meeting. Sarah keeps being confused about the parenting plan, and again, reading the old one. Brian has to explain that Sarah only really needs one call a week. And Sarah asks, so Brian, is it because of the payment of the calls, or because you believe that the calls are harmful? Or too many calls are harmful? And Brian says both. Brian is basically like, look, we need to cut off contact. A little more. You are too up his ass, right? That's not what he's saying, but that's what he means. Sarah asks how Brian knows they're harmful. He sees what happens to the son after the calls. Sarah asks why Brian doesn't contact her about it then, and he says, I don't care. I don't care. Like Sarah wants Brian to be like, well, why didn't you contact me and we can discuss a plan? He doesn't care to. No one cares to, and Sarah seemed to think she got one over on him at this point. Sarah asks if Brian told the son that the son should say he wants to control if he answers Sarah calls. And Brian said no, the son wants to decide whether he can answer Sarah or not. The judge wants to be able to tell her no. The son wants to be able to tell her no. Sarah asks why Brian doesn't care. That really got to her. And the judge says, next question. Sarah is now trying to invoke the 2018 parenting plan. Again, complaining Brian doesn't respond to her. The judge moves her past it. Sarah asks if they signed a new parenting plan, and Brian explains that's what we're trying to do. Because Sarah's got this thing where I'm trying to understand. The first parenting plan had both their signatures. I don't think the second one, the temporary one, had her signature. So now she's trying to claim that they needed to have her signature, but she also can't do either of them, so we need a new parenting plan anyway. She's got outside help, and she still doesn't know what's going on. I don't know if that says more to her or the people talking to her on the outside. Let's see here. Judge has to tell Sarah she's going beyond the issues at hand, and the judge has explained it to her repeatedly. Sarah starts asking about her old objection to relocation and is told next question. Sarah asks the judge what part of this case is. Like, Sarah doesn't know what part of the trial they're doing right now, like what she's supposed to be doing. She's lost. The judge tells Sarah she's wasting time and won't go past 5 p.m. So the judge is already extending this longer than it was supposed to be. Sarah asks if attorney's fees were a choice. Yes, like Brian could have done this pro se, but Sarah's a mess, so you want to make sure you do it right. Money in commissary was voluntary. Brian corrects her. We had an agreement. Sarah cuts him off, saying all questions are yes or no. So as soon as she didn't like the answer, it's now yes or no's. Sarah asked, didn't she try to get a guardian ad litem? Yes, maybe. She was denied that by the court, by the way. Sarah asked Brian if he drinks. Yes. How often? Objection, relevance. Sarah complains they're taking her drinking into account. Sarah, your drinking led to you being a murderer and spending the rest of your life in prison. It's very relevant. Do you drink in front of our child? And Brian says, I've had a drink in front of our child, which Sarah kind of scoffs at. Because for Sarah, remember, this is just a sip. Did I go and get another bottle of Woodbridge Chardonnay for this video? Maybe. Maybe I did. Sarah tries to argue that Brian is wrong about the travel time to the prison. I don't know, Sarah. I'd probably trust the person not incarcerated. And at this point, Sarah turns to the judge and says, Judge, I'm not sure what I'm doing. Now it's Brian's attorney questioning Sarah. Sarah got asked if she filed a financial audit. Sarah tells him to ask questions while looking for it, and he says, no, I'm going to ask you questions about it. So now we come into the money that doesn't make sense, and Sarah's excuses are exquisite, I must say. Basically, Sarah has expenses, but somehow no income. They ask if these expenses were actually incurred because she didn't have income, and Sarah asked what the word incurred means. They ask if Sarah actually paid for these items, and she said yes, and food prices fluctuate. They get Sarah to admit that the facility feeds her for free, though. So why does Sarah need $250 for food if she's being fed for free? She claims she needs it for her low blood sugar. Sarah also claims some meals are not appetizing, so she can't digest them. Basically, Sarah's saying, I refuse to eat some of the prison food. Sarah says she's incurring the expenses. How are you affording it? Contributions. Friends and her brother give her money, she says, on rare instances. The $250 is for supplemental food. Sarah says to digest food for medical reasons. Sarah is claiming her honey buns are medicinal. You know what? I was about to say, even I wouldn't expect that, but no, I would. Sarah asked for $100 for gifts for holidays. Is that for the son? Yes. You think it's appropriate for your ex-husband to have to give you alimony so you can purchase gifts on your own behalf with his money? And Sarah goes, my alimony is meant for however I choose to spend it. And they ask, is that fair to Brian? And Sarah goes, alimony is court ordered. You're right, Sarah. That's why we're here. And you are making the argument for them that you don't deserve it, that you owe Brian money, that you should get nothing. Next is $200 for communication fees. Is that the phone calls Brian pays for? Sarah responds with bullshit. And starts complaining that, like, that's actually an estimate if I got to use the other communication methods that Brian won't use. They ask if Brian is paid for all communications, and Sarah starts ranting. The judge has to make her answer, and it's eventually, yes, Brian's paying for all of it, and she's listing it in her expenses as if she's incurring the cost. $50 for clothing and $15 for dental. Are you not providing clothes in prison? Sarah claims they charge quarterly for new clothes. I guess she's got to stay in the fashion trends. Sarah said the prison only provides all-in-one cleaner and toothpaste and toothbrush. Sarah put $50 for, it's like $50 for creditor for Department of Corrections. Sarah's like, oh yeah, someone told me to put that down. So she's being helped through this by someone, whether internal or external, and they are bad at it. So the only way you can buy these things through a third party or Mr. Boone. And Sarah says, sir, I have no money. I think that's what it was. Sir, I have no money. So she has no money. Either way. Time for Sarah's evidence and testimony. So Sarah's up. She gets to tell her side. And it's going to be Boone-y. Like, it's going to be what you expect. Sarah wants to put in the original parenting plan and then a divorce class. Sarah wants to then explain the evidence, but the judge said it's not needed. You can see this stuff here in her exhibits that are admitted. And there's going to be some that aren't admitted. So don't think that's all. Sarah is complaining the parenting plan can't be changed without signatures, and the petitioner has to prove that Sarah is unfit. Well, Sarah, you are a murderer in prison for life. It is a pretrial filing, and she's repeating it. Sarah again says she knows the son's girlfriend, and Brian called her a killer. Sarah is literally reading things she submitted to the court, which is a waste of everyone's time. People forget that I have a pending appeal, just as I have since day one of my incarceration, and I'm striving utmost to be successful. Something like that. So basically, she's thinking she's going to get out. Sarah's complaining about how she can possibly have her son on the weekends, and Sarah complains someone in Australia bought the record for the son, and Brian's slandering them, or I don't know. So she's got people from Australia sending things to her son, and she doesn't understand the whole point of this is because she can't spend time with the son that there has to be changes. At one point they say Sarah just stopped talking and everyone just kind of like, is she done? And then she jumped back in that Brian needs to improve and the son needs personal space. Sarah complains about no guardian ad litem, which again was a court decision. Now she wants to submit something about relocation. Sarah claims it shows her dedication. And that it's a violation if Sarah didn't sign the parenting plan. The judge explained that Sarah has to admit that she violated the timeshare agreement after being arrested, and Sarah says, but the timeshare is my only violation. So Sarah, in Sarah's mind, Brian is this evil person with all these violations. All Sarah did was murder a man and go to prison for life, so obviously she's the victim. Like, it's mind-blowing. I'm sure the others that were there in person explain it better, because I'm cobbling together things, but and it might be out of order for me because again, this is cobbled. The judge explains that the parenting plan from 2018 is before criminal charges. Sarah is basically complaining Brian's violations are worse than hers because she only has violations because she murdered the man. Sarah asked the judge if she should bring up case law. So, if you watch the Sarah Boone trial with me, thank you, I appreciate it. But if you watched it with me, I kept talking about how Sarah, in her trial, kept getting screwed over by case law because case law doesn't support her defense. Sarah seems to have been told case law, case law, case law. It doesn't work out for her. Sarah is reading off case law that has nothing to do with this case. I think I heard her use some of the names before and it didn't make sense then, like Hunter v. Hunter. We've gone through these with Sarah's stuff. Some of the cases she's listing don't even exist. My personal guess is fans outside are actually using Chat GPT because if you haven't watched my other videos, I have covered cases where lawyers have used Chat GPT and it hallucinates case law and makes it up and finds case law that doesn't say things and just adds it and says it does. And that would make sense because none of this makes sense. This seems like Chat GPT to me. Sarah actually cites a case saying there is no excuse for timeshare violations. So that would be like a terrible thing, but Sarah admits to timeshare violations. Sarah brings up case law about terminating parental rights, and the judge has to explain to her there is no termination of parental rights happening right now. I think there should be, but that's not what's happening. Sarah says she's done. The judge asks if there's any more evidence, and Sarah asks if she can give more case law. This went on for so long, the judge's laptop literally died. So they're off the record, because the judge has to get that done. Brian and his lawyer, according to people there, were laughing because it's off the record. Brian is talking about how Sarah had no remorse at her sentencing. I'm sorry is not written in her at all. Sarah's back. We're back on the record. More case law. 15-minute warning. We're getting up to that time frame, right? The judge is warning Sarah. Sarah complains about being on the phone being difficult, and the judge says something like Sarah chose to waste her own time. Thank you, judge. The officer that's with Sarah, though, then tells her she has 5 minutes to get off. Judge says 15, officer says 5. Officer explains to the judge that Sarah has to be removed. The judge is angry because the judge tried to have Sarah brought down, argued for 7 or 8 months to get this set up, and this was all done so there wouldn't be an interruption, and now there is an interruption. Brian's attorney suggests written closing arguments. The judge asks for any other evidence that Sarah has. The judge says she is not considering a motion for contempt, so that failed. But as it explains, Sarah is actually talking about another motion for contempt than the one that the judge thinks, so that one will be considered at the end when everything's said and done. And Sarah is quickly trying to submit evidence, so you can see the stuff there that hasn't been mentioned, all those different evidence numbers. Those are things she submitted right now. Multiple letters that she wrote, she once submitted, denied as self-serving hearsay. A bunch of character witness letters, objection, hearsay, not submitted. Now, if you look here, it says DOC canteen items with current pricing. Sarah Boone referred to it as her medical snacks. Honey buns are medical now. Sarah is just submitting nonsense, and Sarah is saying they are taking her out. They're taking her out of the room. And they explain to Sarah she has to do a closing statement postmarked by Tuesday at 5 p.m., 5-page max, which shocks Sarah to the core. I'm expecting front and back. I'm expecting more than 5. I'm expecting Sarah to complain. I'm expecting 5 pages complaining there's a 5-page limit, okay? That's what I'm expecting from Sarah. And Sarah, again, asks what they're here for. Because Sarah doesn't seem to know what should be in her closing statement. Well, everything I've heard is Brian seemed to be doing well. I'm glad to hear it. Sounds like the son is doing well and realizing Sarah's probably not a good person and maybe doing a little pushback. I'm glad to hear it. Um, I do want to say that you might be wondering the time frame of this. I I don't know enough about it, but I have read people talking about this appearance and the time frames and when we might get information. It'll be a few weeks after the submission on Tuesday, but there is a world where if Sarah is given any money, if it's over, someone said 2,400. I don't know if that's correct, but if it's over a certain amount, when they go in front of Judge Kranick about her appeals attorney leaving, because that's going to have a deadline in September to have that heard, if she has that money, she might be denied the free public attorney. And if Sarah were to get any sort of significant money given to her, especially because she had, I don't even know, I can't think of a word bad enough. She brought up George and tried to use him as an excuse. Because she did that, if I personally was in the Torres family, I would be finding out if there is any sort of civil liability I can slap on her, that I can seize from her commissary or anything like that, just to make sure that it's, oh my god, I can't, I can believe it. I can believe she brought up George. She bringing up videos from her trial. Yeah, Sarah, what should we talk about? Should we talk about the video where you harass George when he's drunk trying to get a reaction? Or should we talk about the video where there's a broken TV that doesn't work and you obviously, very obviously, we're just going to hit it with a bat for fun and he's telling you that you have to help him take it out when it's done and you tried to lie about what that was? Or could it be the videos of George in the suitcase? Like, what videos do you want? Should it be the body cam footage of when you strangled George and got felony charges for it? Like, what videos, Sarah? Could it be the body cams of George crying up in the room after you assaulted him? What are the videos, Sarah? Brian thankfully called her out that the domestic violence went the other direction. And the thing is, Brian would know because Brian had to live with her too. But there's that. Getting a little late for me, I have to say. I still haven't done the Donna Adelson trial for the day. Um, so I don't know when that video will come out. That's I want to do this. I'm gonna be honest. I was more interested in this, but I do want to know the Donna Adelson trial. I might It might be less concise than usual if you're waiting on that video. I might try to shorten it up just so I can get it done at a reasonable time frame. It's still going to be a while. And then I also want to mention that no matter what happens Friday in the trial, I have something going on, so I won't be able to do that. Um, I've just had a lot going on. I've got there's a family member who needs biopsies, and then the hospital doesn't tell them to not take certain medication until the day before, so now everything gets delayed, and there's weird stuff going on that's screwed up my timeline of stuff, and that's a small part of it. A lot of things, so that's why some of the videos, Donna Adelson videos, have been like later at night, and things are out of order, or I'm not covering certain things more. I have a lot going on, and I am working on it, and I'm glad I was able to get you this one. So the next Sarah Boone thing you can probably expect from me is I might do the closing arguments if those are, given out to the public, because people will post them on social media. I might cover those and we can talk about if Sarah actually puts 5 pages in, what Brian says at the end. I think Brian's case is solid, I'm gonna be honest. Um and then after that will be the decision, and we have to find out what's happening with her appeals attorney. The appeals attorney is probably not going to be exciting. It's most likely probably going to be, yes, you can leave, you get a new appeals attorney, and then we hear nothing for a few months until that attorney is possibly run ragged enough to quit. So we'll see. But I want to thank you all, appreciate you all, and I'll see you in the next video whenever I get it done.